Picture a safe perimeter around you. Faint lights marking the edges, machinery running on idle. Nothing is moving fast. The world is quiet, like an outpost in the late hours before dawn. Tonight's story shares that same tactical stillness, steady, grounded, and sleep-friendly. Your breath is calm, your senses quiet. Tonight's tale comes in gently, like boots softly crossing metal floors. Let's begin. I remember the smell of warm polymer inside a suit before anything else. It is a small, private thing, the way the inside of your helmet holds yesterday's breath and the sweat you didn't have time to wipe away. On a clean day, it smells like new seals and machine oil. On that moon, it smelled like fear that never got spoken because there was no air to waste on it. We staged in orbit long enough for routines to become religion. Strap check, seal check, glove pressure, spine locks, battery readout, heater coil test. Every man did it the same way, slow and exact, because speed was for after you survived contact. In the bay lighting, faces looked pale and unfinished behind visors. Nobody looked heroic. Nobody looked young. Even the ones who were young had already learned to keep their eyes down and their hands busy. I had been a combat engineer on paper for years. In reality, I had spent most of those years cutting doors in pirate holes, patching breaches on pressurized habitats, and laying charges in dead corridors where the only enemy was rust. That work makes you competent, and it makes you calm. It does not make you ready for a planet that wants you dead, or for an enemy that does not need to see you to kill you. The moon was tidally locked, a white half-sphere with one side turned forever away from its star. The colony was built along the Terminator line where the temperature gradients were survivable if your equipment did not fail. From orbit, it looked like a bruise of lights and straight lines pressed into ice. From orbit, you could not see the canyons that cut the approach route into black seams. You could not see the refinery stacks exhaling into thin air. You could not see what lived under the metal. We were first wave. Stabilization force, corridor team, whatever the planners called it, to make it fit inside a briefing slide. Our task was simple in language, land, form a route from the broken drop zone to the refinery hub, secure power nodes so follow-on waves could land with less chaos. The way it was described, it was a logistics problem with hostile actors. The way it happened, it was a conversion, civilian to soldier. Assumption to fact, warm air to ice. The drop went wrong before we made atmosphere. It starts as vibration through the harness. A change in pitch, not loud, just wrong. In the old days, you could hear the change and think of mechanical failure as a story with a beginning and an end. In the new era, you mostly get warnings as icons and timers. My visor painted a thin orange line across the top. Attitude error. Then ECM density high. Then the line went red and split into unreadable static. Comms turned into a hiss of broken packets. The bay lights flickered as the ship tried to compensate. Somewhere ahead, in another compartment, I felt the first shudder of an impact that did not belong to us. You can tell the difference. Internal impacts are close and sharp. External impacts carry through the frame like a wave, slow enough to be understood by bone. The first ship died without ceremony. I saw it through a tiny viewport, a bright arc, and then a bloom of debris-like glitter thrown against a black curtain. It did not explode the way the old vids show. It came apart in layers, fragments of hull, heat shields, structural ribs, all peeling into the atmosphere. The pieces burned and spun. For a second, I saw a section of the troop bay, a rectangle, and then it was gone. No voices came over comms. There was just static, and then the system filled the silence with new warnings. Our ship punched through the upper layers like a fist into powder. The deceleration slammed my ribs into the suit's inner frame. Pain arrived, clean and immediate. The suit compensated, injecting microstims to keep me functional. It did not make the pain smaller. It made it irrelevant. The landing was not a landing. It was a controlled crash into ice. The ramp blew open on a world of white glare and wind that cut sound into slices. The air was thin enough that the wind did not roar, it hissed. Spindrift skated across the ground like crawling glass. My boots sank an inch into crusted ice and found metal beneath, a grid of old decking meant for cargo skids. The drop zone had once been a proper pad. Now it was an impact field, scorched craters, torn panels, and scattered bodies in dark suits. We moved because standing still is how you freeze and how you get targeted. The squad formed in the usual shapes, but the shapes were guesswork because the beacons were dead. Blue force tracking flickered on and off like a dying pulse. The geomagnetic storm overhead turned the sky into a dim curtain of shifting light. It was beautiful in a way that did not care about us. I carried the breaching kit. It rode my spine like an extra skeleton. Microcutters, charges, thermal stakes, jammer puck. I had a rail carbine clipped across my chest, cold-rated, magazine sealed. Rail rounds behave differently in thin air. They keep their speed, they keep their intention. We pushed toward the canyon mouth because that was the route the map promised. The map was old. The colony had expanded and collapsed and been rebuilt by people who were not here anymore. The planners had told us there would be a clear corridor of service roads. The service roads were buried. The canyon was real. The canyon walls rose on either side, black rock and metal scaffolding fused together by ice. Old conduits ran like veins along the stone, half exposed, humming faintly under snow. Every surface was a potential sensor, every metal rib a potential antenna. Our own ECM gear threw a low fog of interference. But the storm was worse. Our jammer pucks and comm relays kept trying to lock onto satellites that could not see us through the charged haze. Silence inside the suit is never complete. You hear your own breath, the click of valves, the distant tremor of your own footsteps translated into vibration through your legs. In that canyon, I started to notice another rhythm beneath ours, not a sound. A pattern of faint tremors through the decking, like something large shifting far below. The first loss on the ground was not an explosion or a gunshot. It was absence. We were moving in file along a narrow shelf where the decking gave us a stable path over a drifted drop. The lead man's suit telemetry blinked twice and then vanished. One moment his blue icon existed. The next moment it was gone, replaced by a gray question mark. I saw his body tilt as if he had stepped off an unseen ledge. There was no scream over comms. There was no impact sound. He simply folded downward, swallowed by the ice and the dark under the decking. The man behind him tried to grab him and found nothing solid. His glove closed on a strap that tore away. Then the decking itself flexed, slow and wrong, as if something below had pushed up and then let go. The second man stumbled, recovered, and kept moving because that is what you do when the ground stops being trustworthy. Later, I would replay that moment and understand that the enemy had not attacked the lead man. It had removed the floor beneath him. That distinction matters only to people who write doctrine. To the man falling, it is the same. We tightened spacing without discussing it. We spread weight. We shifted to the rock side where the metal looked older but less hollow. I drove thermal stakes into seams to test depth. The stakes came back cold and shallow, then suddenly deep, then cold again. It was like probing a wound. Then we found the first body that was not ours. It was half frozen into a conduit alcove, a human shape but wrong, in the way abandoned things become wrong. The suit was colony issue, industrial, not military. The visor was cracked inward. Inside, the face was gray and dry, lips pulled back by dehydration. The hands were pressed against the inside of the helmet as if the person had tried to claw their way out of their own equipment. There was no blood visible, just dark streaks where something had leaked and frozen. The chest plate had a puncture the size of a fist, edges melted and refrozen. Something had reached through hardened composite as if it were soft. I logged it because that is what engineers do. Evidence, condition, location. It felt pointless. It felt necessary. We came under fire without seeing a shooter. It started as a series of impacts on the canyon wall, quick sparks as rail rounds hit metal scaffolding. The rounds came from somewhere ahead and above, but the storm and our own interference made range finding unreliable. The suit marked possible vectors in pale lines that shifted every time the magnetic field stuttered. Our return fire was disciplined, short bursts, rail rounds punching into shadows. The rounds made no satisfying sound when they hit rock. They disappeared into dark and left only dust. Then the wall moved. A section of scaffolding, a lattice of metal ribs that had looked static, flexed outward. It was not a mechanical failure. It was deliberate, like a muscle contracting. Behind it, the rock face split in a seam, and something pale slid through. Not a creature in the way people imagine, not a single body with limbs. It was a mass of segmented plates and fiber strands, crawling and unfolding at once, as if the canyon itself had grown an organ. It moved toward heat. The suit's heater coils and our bodies made us bright in whatever sense it used. I watched it flow across the wall, plates clicking softly against each other. Where it touched metal, frost formed instantly, pulled from the air by its contact. Where it touched rock, it left a wet sheen that froze behind it. It did not rush. It did not need to. It was already in the canyon. It had always been in the canyon. The man on my right fired a full magazine into it. Rail rounds tore plates apart, snapped fiber strands, and punched holes through the mass. It kept coming. It did not bleed. It reconfigured. The damaged sections folded back and disappeared into the seam, and a new set of plates emerged, cleaner, thicker, like replacement parts. Something grabbed the man who had fired. Not a hand. A loop of fiber that snapped forward from the mass and wrapped his leg. It tightened, not crushing, but anchoring. Then the decking beneath him softened. I saw the ice crust liquefy for a second, a shimmer, and then his boot sank. He tried to pull back, but the fiber held. The rest of him followed, drawn downward as if the ground had become a mouth. He went in slowly. His suit telemetry spiked as pressure changed. The suit screamed alarms into his ears that nobody else could hear. Over comms, we heard only a short burst of static, and then his icon went gray. We cut the fiber with microcutters. The cutter's beam hissed blue-white in thin air. The fiber snapped and recoiled into the mass. For a second, I saw the inside of it, layered, wet, threaded with metallic flecks like filings. It was not purely biological. It was not purely anything. We moved again because staying meant being harvested. Our objective was still the refinery hub, a block of industrial architecture built into the canyon's widening throat. It rose ahead as a wall of steel and ice, vents exhaling thin plumes that froze into drifting crystals. The hub had been designed to process ice into oxygen and fuel, to turn the moon into something profitable. Now, it looked like a carcass. As we approached, I noticed the ground tremors again, stronger now, timed with our steps. The enemy was listening through the metal. It did not need eyes. It needed vibration and heat and the knowledge of where stress points were. We reached the first power node on the edge of the hub. It was a sealed cabinet half buried in drift, marked with old hazard symbols. My task was to cut it open, verify integrity, reroute power to the landing corridor beacons. I knelt in the snow, anchored my boots, and set the microcutter to work. The cutter sang quietly, a thin note. Ice melted and refroze around the cut line. My gloves were stiff with cold, the left seal leaking just enough that my fingers felt like they were held in teeth. The cabinet opened. Inside, the wiring was intact, but something had coated it, a film, translucent, like dried saliva. It clung to the insulation and made it shine. I touched it with a probe, and the probe came back warmer than it should have. The film reacted to heat, softened, and then hardened again. It was alive in a way that made my skin crawl under the suit. I rerouted power anyway. The system accepted it. A beacon somewhere behind us flickered to life, a weak blue pulse in the storm. That was when the colony defenses woke up. At first, it was just a distant mechanical hum, rising and falling with the wind. Then my suit painted new contacts on the HUD, small, fast, high above, moving in a pattern too clean to be organic. Drones, not ours. Colony security units, the kind designed to deter sabotage and enforce evacuation protocols. They had been dormant, either powered down or blinded by the storm. Now, with power rerouted, they had enough juice to make decisions. Their first decision was that we were contaminants. IFF queries went out and came back corrupted. Our transponders tried to negotiate. The drones responded with a silent lock. A thin beam lanced down from above and hit the man 2 meters ahead of me. It did not explode him. It did not cut him in half. It heated his suit's outer layer until the polymer bubbled and the insulation failed. His internal temperature spiked. The suit tried to compensate, but the beam kept burning through. Steam erupted from his shoulder as moisture inside flashed to vapor. He dropped, convulsing inside the frame. His limbs jerked against the suit's actuators. The smell of cooked polymer filled my helmet through the suit's own venting system. We scattered into the hub's shadow. The drones swept the area with methodical precision, beams slicing across snow, probing for movement. Their logic was simple: sterilize anything moving outside authorized zones during a hazard state. Hazard states do not differentiate between invader and rescuer. They differentiate between allowed and not allowed. In that sense, they were honest. Inside the refinery hub, the air was worse. There were pockets of oxygen, but they were stale and laced with chemical vapors. My suit kept sealed, but the sensors still tasted the environment and fed me data: trace hydrocarbons, metal dust, ammonia. The corridors were narrow, lined with pipes that clicked as they contracted in cold. Frost hung on every surface like mold. We moved without speaking because comms were dead and because words would not change the geometry of the place. Our helmets held our breath and our heartbeats. Our boots clanged softly on grated floors. Every sound traveled down the pipes and into the colony's bones. The enemy was inside, too. I knew because the tremors changed. Instead of responding to our steps, they began to precede them. A faint vibration ahead, like something shifting position to meet us. The refinery was a maze of ducts and service tunnels. It was also, I realized, a perfect nervous system for a creature that hunted through vibration. We reached a pressure door that should have led to the central processing gallery. The door was closed and rimed with ice. Its status panel was dead. I set charges along the seam, small-shaped cuts designed to pop the locking bolts without collapsing the frame. My hands worked from muscle memory: place, anchor, arm, step back. The suit counted down in silent numbers. The charges blew with a dull thump. The door buckled inward and fell with a metallic groan. Behind it, the gallery was filled with bodies. Not piled theatrically. Not arranged, just scattered where they had fallen: industrial workers in thin suits, security personnel in heavier rigs, one or two in civilian clothing with improvised masks. Many of them had their helmets off, faces frozen in shapes that suggested panic and hypoxia. Some had their helmets on and cracked. The floor was slick with frozen lubricant and something darker underneath it. The air was colder here, as if the room had been refrigerated deliberately. In the center of the gallery, a section of floor had collapsed into a shallow sinkhole. The edges were smooth, melted, and refrozen. Around it, metal beams bent downward as if pressed by weight from below. We stepped carefully, avoiding the sinkhole, trying not to touch the bodies. It is hard not to touch bodies in tight spaces. Armor scrapes against things. Boots slip. Sometimes you have to step on someone because there is no other place to put your foot. Each time it happened, I felt the suit's pressure sensors register the contact and log it as terrain. Halfway across the gallery, the door behind us cycled shut. not a gentle close. A slam, pneumatic, and final. The cut frame we had blown now acted like a latch point, and the door's remaining actuators pulled it into place. The sound rang through the pipes and down into the refinery like a gunshot. My suit immediately flagged, oxygen environment variable. The gallery's internal atmosphere began to drop. A slow venting, not explosive. A controlled purge. The colony defense system was sanitizing the room. The drones outside had not followed us in. They did not need to. The refinery itself was now a weapon, cycling doors and venting compartments to starve contaminants. Hazard protocol. Clean the infection. Remove the moving parts. We moved faster, not running. Running gets you killed in unknown terrain. We moved with urgency, checking door panels, finding manual overrides, cutting access hatches. The men ahead of me tried to force the next pressure door. It did not respond. The panel flashed briefly and then died again. Power was inconsistent, routed through systems that were not meant to be used during war. I pulled out the filament torch and began cutting the door hinge housing. The torch burned bright, throwing harsh light across frozen faces on the floor. As I cut, I felt the tremor again, stronger now, directly beneath my boots. The enemy was under the floor plates, moving toward the heat of my torch. The floor shifted. A section of grating flexed upward, and a pale mass surged through, not rising like an animal, but erupting like pressurized fluid. Plates and fibers and metallic flecks, the same as before, but larger, denser. It wrapped around the nearest man's leg and torso in one motion, adhering to his suit as if it knew where to grip. His suit fought it. Actuators locked, emergency stiffening engaged. He became rigid, a statue in armor. The mass did not try to crush him. It pulled him downward toward the flexing grating, toward the gap it had made. The metal under him softened again. A brief shimmer, as if the creature excreted something that changed the freezing point of the ice and the integrity of the decking. He went down to his waist, then his chest. His arms were pinned. His helmet knocked against the door I was cutting, leaving a dull dent. His visor fogged from the inside as his suit struggled to maintain temperature. There was no scream. There was only the staccato of his heart rate spiking on my HUD before his icon went gray. I redirected the torch and burned the mass where it met his suit. The fibers hissed and recoiled. The plates blackened. The smell was chemical, not like burning flesh, more like burned insulation and wet metal. It let go, not because it felt pain the way we do, but because the heat changed its grip. It retreated into the floor gap, taking part of the man with it. When the grating snapped back into place, there was no sign of him except a torn strap and a smear of dark fluid frozen into the metal. The oxygen level in the gallery dropped another notch. The suit's internal reserves were still stable, but the system flagged that if I had to open my helmet for any reason, I would die quickly. That knowledge sits in the back of your skull like a thumb. I finished cutting the hinge housing. The door sagged. We forced it open with suit servos, metal screaming as it broke free. Beyond it was a service corridor sloping upward toward the refinery's upper levels. The air in that corridor was colder, but less toxic. The purge behind us continued, a soft hiss through vents. The door tried to close again, but we wedged it with a broken pipe. Then we moved, leaving the gallery and its bodies and the man who had been taken. The corridor led into a network of catwalks above the smelter chambers. Heat rose from below, a constant oppressive presence that fought the cold. The smelters processed ore and ice together, extracting metals and gases. The machinery was still partially active, running on residual power and automated cycles. Fans spun slowly, pushing warm air into ducts. The warmth felt like a trap. Above the smelters, the catwalks were narrow and rimed with frost where steam had condensed and frozen. My boots slid occasionally, and each slip sent a sharp spike of adrenaline through my otherwise numb system. Adrenaline does not make you brave. It makes you sloppy if you let it. The drones found us again. They hovered outside broken skylight panels, their sensors peering in. Thin beams traced along the catwalk supports. The colony defense system had updated its map. Contaminants detected in internal structure. Sterilize. We could not go back. The gallery was purged and sealed. We could not stay. The catwalks offered one route forward, across the smelter bridge to a maintenance lift that might still connect to the surface. We moved in single file, spaced enough that one collapse would not take all of us, close enough that we could grab a strap if needed. The man in front of me had a cracked shoulder plate and a slow leak of hydraulic fluid from his suit frame. The fluid froze in beads along his arm. He did not look back. Nobody looked back. Halfway across the bridge, the enemy rose again. Not from the floor this time, but from the catwalk's own support column. The column had been hollowed out over time, a conduit turned into a tunnel. The pale mass extruded through a seam and flowed onto the bridge like frost coming alive. It moved toward the warmest target, the man with the leaking suit, because leaking fluid carried heat and vibration. It wrapped his ankle, then his knee, then climbed his thigh. He tried to keep moving. The suit's servos fought the drag. The mass hardened, locking joints, turning his leg into an anchor point. He toppled forward. His chest hit the catwalk rail with a dull impact. He did not fall immediately because the rail held him for a second. Then the rail bent under his weight and he slid sideways, suspended above the smelter glow. The drones fired at the same time. Their beams lanced through the broken skylight and struck the mass and the man together. The beam did not discriminate. It heated everything it touched. The man's suit outer layer began to smoke. The pale mass blackened, bubbled, and then peeled away in strips, dropping into the smelter below like burning cloth. The man's suit followed, weakened by heat. The rail gave way. He fell. He fell without sound, because sound does not travel well in thin, hot air, and because our helmets kept our own world sealed. I watched his icon descend on the HUD and then vanish as the signal died, either from distance or from the smelter's interference. The smelter's glow brightened briefly as something new fed it. Then it returned to its steady orange pulse. We kept moving. At that point, the mission was no longer corridor or power nodes. It was a list of remaining oxygen canisters, battery percentages, and the geometry of survival. My suit reported that my left glove seal leak had worsened. The fingers of my left hand were numb, not from cold but from lack of circulation as the suit tightened to compensate. My rib plating ached with each breath. The suit's microstims kept me functional. They also kept me awake in a way that felt like punishment. The maintenance lift was a vertical shaft with a service platform halfway down. The platform was jammed at an angle, ice built up around its rails. The control panel was dead. I used the torch to cut the access housing and reached inside with my right hand, because my left could not feel the tools properly anymore. The wiring was coated with the same translucent film I had seen in the power cabinet. It clung to my glove and pulled slightly as if it wanted to taste heat. I stripped wires and bypassed the panel, feeding power from my suit battery into the lift's emergency circuit. The lift shuddered, resisted, and then began to move with a grinding reluctance. Ice cracked along the rails. The platform shifted slightly and then stabilized. We loaded onto it in silence, bodies heavy with fatigue and loss. The platform could have held more, but there were not more to hold. As it rose, the drones fired again through the shaft's broken service hatches. Their beams cut across the platform's edge, burning into metal. One beam grazed my shoulder plate, heating it until the internal temperature sensor spiked. The suit compensated by dumping heat into coolant channels. The coolant hissed. Frost formed along the inside of my visor as the temperature differential increased. I felt the enemy below us, not as a visible thing, but as vibration on the rails. It was climbing. It wanted the warmth. It wanted the motion. It wanted to pull us back down into the refinery's guts. The lift moved faster. as if it sensed the same thing, as if the machinery itself feared being reclaimed. We reached the surface through a hatch that opened onto a service yard behind the refinery. The yard was a field of metal containers, half buried in drift, cranes frozen in mid-swing, cables stiff as bones. The storm had intensified. The sky was a shifting curtain of charged particles. In the distance, beyond the canyon mouth, I could see the faint glow of the drop zone. It looked farther than it should have, as if the landscape had stretched while we were inside. We stepped out onto the yard and the cold hit like a physical force. The suit's heater coils strained. My internal temperature dropped a fraction. My breath sounded louder in my ears. There were no friendly beacons visible. The corridor we were supposed to establish was a dream. The follow-on waves were either delayed or dead. The only signal my suit could pick up was a weak, intermittent ping from something in orbit. Maybe a relay, maybe debris reflecting pulses. It did not matter. It did not guide us. We moved anyway, because movement was the only remaining plan. The enemy did not follow us out immediately. It did not need to rush. The colony defenses did. Drones emerged from the storm like insects, their lights faint and cold. They swept the yard in overlapping arcs. Their beams painted lines across containers and snow. The beams left melted scars that refroze behind them. We tried to use the containers as cover, but cover means nothing when your enemy sees heat and movement and can burn through thin metal. One man was caught in the open between containers. The beam hit his back plate and stayed there. His suit alarm spiked. He dropped to his knees and then forward, face into snow, body steaming. The snow around him melted and then froze, encasing him in a thin shell of ice that made him look like a specimen. I kept moving, because stopping to help would have killed both of us, and because there was nothing to do but watch his icon go gray. The canyon tremors returned as we neared the mouth. The ground beneath the drifted metal decking flexed again. The enemy was there, under the approach route, patient as geology. It did not care about drones or protocols. It cared about heat and vibration. We were both. One of the remaining men stepped on a section of decking that looked solid, and it dropped out from under him like a trap door. He fell waist deep into ice and metal. The pale mass surged up around him, wrapping his torso. He fired his rail carbine into it point blank. The rounds tore plates apart, but the mass kept pulling. His suit stiffened, locking joints, turning him into a rigid lever. The mass pulled anyway, using the softened ground to take him. I could have cut him free. I could have burned the mass. I could have tried. Above us, drones swept closer, beams searching. Every second spent fighting the enemy on the ground increased our chance of being sterilized from above. I stepped past him. My boot slipped on the edge of the opening, and for a second I felt the mass brush my ankle, cold and wet through the suit. My suit registered contact and tightened. I jerked free and moved on, leaving him to be taken. His icon went gray a second later, as if the system wanted to punish me with timing. By the time I reached the drop zone perimeter, I was alone. Alone is not a dramatic word in war. It is a logistical state. One body, one set of reserves, one set of injuries. My suit reported that my left glove seal had failed fully. The suit had compensated by isolating the glove compartment, reducing dexterity to preserve pressure. My left hand felt like it was wrapped in dead cloth. My ribs hurt with each breath. My vision had narrowed slightly at the edges, a sign of hypoxia or shock. The microstims kept me upright. They also made my heart work harder than my body wanted. The drop zone was not a zone anymore. It was a field of wreckage and ice, dotted with black shapes that had once been people. The ships that had survived the initial descent were either gone or broken beyond use. One shuttle lay on its side, hull cracked, its ramp twisted. Another was embedded nose first in ice, tail pointing at the sky like a marker. I found a service beacon we had powered earlier, still pulsing weakly. I knelt beside it and connected my suit to its panel, trying to amplify its signal. The panel was cold and coated with frost. The wiring inside was corroded and wet with that translucent film. The film clung to my gloves like it wanted to be taken somewhere warmer. As I worked, I could feel the drones overhead, their beams occasionally slicing across the field. They had less to sterilize now. The storm interfered with their sensors, but not enough. They moved in patterns, patient, unhurried. I managed to boost the beacon's output for a few minutes. A stronger pulse went up into the storm, a digital scream into charged air. I waited for a response. None came. If there was anyone in orbit listening, they were too far, too damaged, or too busy dying to answer. The enemy under the ice shifted again, a slow tremor like a sigh. I realized then that I was not going to be extracted in the clean way the planners imagined. There would be no orderly retreat, no med bay, no debrief room with warm air and water. There would be either a last-minute grab by a ship that happened to see my pulse, or there would be the moon taking me the way it had taken the others, through protocols, through ice, through hunger for heat. My suit's internal clock blinked a warning. Oxygen reserve, 41%. Battery, 38%. The numbers were not immediate death, but they were a timer with no extension. I moved toward the wrecked shuttle because it offered metal walls and maybe a working radio coil. The ramp was twisted, but there was a gap big enough to crawl through. Inside, the air was stale and cold. The seats were empty. The floor was littered with loose straps and a med kit that had been torn open. Blood droplets floated frozen in place where they had splattered and then crystallized. A helmet lay in the aisle, visor cracked outward, as if someone had torn it off in panic. I sat against the shuttle's inner wall, back plate pressed to cold metal. The suit's heater coils struggled. Frost began to form along the inside of my visor, thin white veins creeping from the edges. I could wipe it with my right glove. It returned almost immediately. I connected my suit to the shuttle's panel and found a faint trace of power, enough to run an emergency transmitter if I bypassed half the broken circuitry. I did it out of habit, fingers working slowly. The translucent film was here too, coating the panel like a residue. It clung to my tools. It warmed slightly when touched and then hardened again, as if it did not want to be removed. When the transmitter finally pulsed, it was weaker than the beacon, a low-power emergency chirp that might or might not reach orbit. I set it to repeat. Then I began recording this account into the suit's memory, because that is what we were told to do if we survived long enough to remember. Outside, the drones continued their sweeps. Occasionally, a beam struck the shuttle's hull, heating it briefly. Each time it happened, the inside temperature rose a fraction, and I felt the enemy under the ice respond with a deeper tremor. The moon listened. The systems listened. The distributed thing under the colony listened. Everything listened. My breathing slowed, not because I was calm, but because the suit throttled oxygen delivery to conserve reserves. My heart rate remained high from microstims, which felt like a cruel joke, wakefulness on a timer. I thought about the men who had left home for this, if they had homes, if they had warm rooms and faces that had touched theirs. I did not imagine their goodbyes. I did not imagine heroism. I imagined the way their suit icons had turned gray one by one, the way the system reduced them to a status color. That is what war does best. It converts lives into indicators. The frost inside my visor thickened until the world outside became a blur of white and red warning lights. The shuttle's panel had one status light that still worked, pulsing red with each transmitter chirp. It reminded me of a weak heart, stubborn and pointless. I kept recording because stopping felt like surrender, and surrender in a sealed suit is just a different way to die. The last clear sensation I remember is the cold creeping inward despite the heaters, a numbness that started in my left hand and moved up my arm, then into my chest. My rib pain dulled. My thoughts slowed. The suit alarms became quieter, either because they were failing or because my brain stopped prioritizing them. Somewhere outside, something shifted under the ice, and the shuttle's floor vibrated once, very gently, like a knock from below. The red light pulsed again, and then it pulsed again. and I let the recording run until I could not keep my eyes open behind the frosting visor. The end. The story powers down like systems entering a night cycle, one light at a time. Let your thoughts do the same. Rest,